Hi, I'm Erin from Fabricate. Today I'm going to show you how to remove, disassemble, reassemble, and reinstall the feeder on your Ultimaker S5 or Ultimaker S3 machine. This should be done regularly as part of your maintenance to make sure the feeder is kept clean. Let's get started. You'll need your 2mm hex head screwdriver. First, we'll slide the clamp clip out sideways. Set it down carefully. You don't want to lose it. Put 2 fingers down on your collet to hold it in place and pull up on the bowing tube. This should release it. Unscrew the 2 screws, one at the bottom and one at the top of your feeder. Alright, now when we remove it, we're going to want to do this gently and be careful not to lose either screw. You also need to be mindful of the cable that's right here. This is your flow sensor cable and board. There you go. Okay, now we can go ahead and disassemble your feeder. All right, now that we've removed the feeder from the printer, we can go ahead and get started. So there's a couple things you want to note. This is the feeder tension. You want to make sure generally to keep the feeder tension in the middle. But before we take this apart, we're going to want to decrease the feeder tension by raising the tension indicator up to the top. Our screwdriver fits perfectly in this little hole at the top here. This will take the tension off of it because there's a spring inside, and if you take this apart without undoing the tension, parts are going to fly everywhere. So here's your flow sensor board. We only recommend touching this when you're ESD safe. But we'll go ahead. You can unscrew the board here. If you ever needed to remove it. We'll flip this over. So now we're going to unscrew the 4 screws holding the feeder together. We can lift the top half off. Do it very carefully. So we have our 4 screws and our bearing wheel here. Now our collet came out when we did that. There's our collet, our feeder ring. Here's that spring I mentioned. So you've got your spring, your tension indicator, and a screw. Now you've got 2 parts to your lever here. You can go ahead and slide that out. As I mentioned, the lever's in 2 parts. So this is your easy up and down lift, and the part with the idler bearing. So we've got another bearing here that should stay fully seated always. Your knurled part that grips the filament. There should be a bit of lubrication on these 2 posts to help everything move smoothly. And this is your flow sensor, which consists of a magnet and a very small delicate spring. I do not recommend removing these parts. This should be sufficient for taking it apart for cleaning. You can always use canned air or paper towels to go ahead and blow any filament out. So let's get this reassembled now. All right, we're ready to reassemble this. So here we have the feeder showing at the top for the collet, the gap at the bottom for the feeder ring. On the side here, we have the 2 pegs, one for the feeder lever arm and the other for the main part of the feeder lever just above the flow sensor. They both have a little bit of grease on them. You can have either Ural grease or Magnaloop depending on when the printer was built. Either is fine. They'll just help the plastic parts move more easily against one another. So we're going to set that down. We take the 2 halves of the lever here. So we're going to go ahead and slide this one in here. It moves kind of like a little kick. And you can see the divot here that's going to hold the tension spring. So we're going to push this right over here and let both of those holes line up with the pegs and slip it into place. Next, we're going to take the tension spring and the tension indicator with the 20mm screw. We're going to pop those into position. Just sit right cozy like. And we're going to, let's make sure the tension indicator is on the outside. And we're going to compress the spring a little bit. There. So we have the spring and the tension indicator down in this midsection here, and the upper part of the screw and the screw head within the top half of the feeder. It's pressed right up against the top, which is fine. You just don't want it on the outside, because if it's on the outside of the feeder, it's not going to be able to be adjusted later. All right, we're going to take the feeder ring, slide that right in at the bottom there. Take your collet, drop that in at the top. We'll flip your feeder casing over, and that will snugly hold everything in place. We're going to go ahead and screw that all together. We've got 4 screws we're going to drop in place. Okay, so the housing has now been screwed together. So one thing you'll notice is that the tension indicator is all the way up at the top here. Now there's a tiny notch in the housing to show you when you've reached the midpoint, and a little line on the tension indicator. So we're going to take our screwdriver, put it in the hole right here at the top of the feeder, and turn it until we can get that tension indicator down to the midpoint. There we go, right at the middle. Next, we're going to look at the back of the feeder. So you can see 2 pegs here and here above the magnet, and a hole right there. So a kind of cool thing, if you didn't know it, if you flip over the flow sensor, there is an Ultimaker robot on the back. While the robot may have left the panels of the printer, it still appears on a lot of the electronics. So there's 3 holes on the robot. You can see 2 along the side here, and 1 slightly bigger one right about where the face is. So we're going to flip this over. Try not to drop it. So the 2 side holes line up with those pegs. And the last hole is going to line up with the hole on the feeder so that we can put the screw in and hold it all together. Now, because of the magnets involved, I do recommend putting the screw on your screwdriver first to try and hold it in place before it starts to escape from you. All right, and we want to do this very carefully. Try and hold it carefully in position with the board aligned with those pegs so that everything is in the right spot. Don't want to over tighten it, but you want it tight enough. And there you go. We're ready to reassemble it onto the printer. Now we're going to reinstall your feeder. Your feeder housing, carefully plug the flow sensor back into the board. It should just slide right back into place. Now you don't have a lot of slack, so be careful, because if it's not plugged in and you don't have it turned disabled, you will have error messages. Just ease that back into position so that the gears and the screw holes line up. There we go. Oh, not time for the Bowden tube yet. Pop the screws back in place. Screw them in. Bowden tube set. Slide the clamp clip under the collet, and you're ready to get back to printing.